From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. The government of Colombia announced on Thursday that 4 bodies were found in the south of the country, 3 of which may be the team of Ecuadorian reporters who were kidnapped and killed at the border. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos confirmed the news via Twitter. Ecuadorian authorities and family members of the victims are said to travel to Colombia on Friday to identify the remains. Journalist Javier Ortega, photographer Paul Rivas, and their driver Efraín Segarra were kidnapped by the Oliver Sinesterra Front and its leader Guacho in Mataje, near the border with Colombia. Their deaths were confirmed on April 13th, and since then, family and colleagues have demanded that authorities recover the bodies of their loved ones.
Authorities have requested that 2 direct relatives of the journalists be present for this procedure in order to take samples of body fluids and then perform the lab tests, which are expected to last between 24 and 48 hours.
Once we can prove that these are indeed the bodies of our comrades and fellow Ecuadorians, all of the international issues, all of the repatriation matters have to be organized.
Colombia's president-elect Iván Duque has had his first meeting with the outgoing president Juan Manuel Santos to discuss the transition between their 2 governments. The meeting was held at the Nariño Palace and came as supporters of the 2 men have been at loggerheads in Congress over legislation to implement the peace deal with the FARC. At Duque's request, the Senate has refused to discuss the law, raising concern over the future of the peace process. Still in Colombia, severe crimes were reported by the Attorney General's office about a crime network that might be serving electoral campaigns for Congress members, candidates of the Conservative Party and right-wing party Centro Democrático.
Y entregándolo a los líderes.
The Attorney General presented a report on electoral corruption. Investigations revealed cases of excessive budgets for electoral campaigns as well as vote trafficking, voter manipulation, ballot stuffing and fake public documents.
We found irregularities in different regions of the country. Among the detained people, there are officials of different levels. We were also able to identify more than 2,000 mediators that benefited Congress members.
Among the most important cases are candidate Aida Merlano from the Conservative Party, as well as Margarita Restrepo and Maria Fernanda Cabal from Centro Democrático, who have been linked with threats against workers and also with vote trafficking.
There were alleged threats against teachers of kindergartens in the Kennedy community. They said that if they didn't vote for whom they were told, their contracts wouldn't be renewed.
For some senators, this goes against democracy, so they criticize the duty of the attorney's office. Many politicians are in power thanks to corruption, but they have never been investigated.
I know many Congress members are elected via vote buying, so I was expecting some important members to be in those investigations. But the truth is that they aren't even scratching the surface of this situation.
The Attorney General's office will organize interrogations and will send copies of the investigations to the Supreme Court of Justice.
U.S. President Donald Trump gave orders to federal agencies to begin reuniting children with their parents who were separated at the Mexican border. The move comes after Trump signed an executive order to end the separations, although his decision will move parents with children to the front line for immigration processing. It doesn't end a 10-week-old zero-tolerance policy that calls for prosecution of immigrants crossing the border illegally. Protests continue against the U.S. administration's mistreatment on migrants on the border, while lawmakers have delayed until next week a vote on a new immigration bill. Outraged protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City and compared Trump to Adolf Hitler. The demonstrators also used chain dolls to represent the children who are still being kept away from their parents in different detention centers in the United States. They demanded the immediate release of these children.
I believe they will continue to implement these types of radical, fascist, offensive, atrocious measures that separate families and destroy entire lives.
Yet another Mexican candidate was murdered on early Thursday morning, just days ahead of the July 1st general elections. This brings the number of politicians killed since September in 2017 to 121. Fernando Ángeles Juárez, the mayoral candidate for the Democratic Revolution Party in Ocampo, was gunned down leaving his hotel in the state of Michoacán. No suspects have been identified yet. Omar Gómez Lucatero, an independent candidate for mayor in Aguililla, Michoacán, was murdered Wednesday night next to the local cemetery close to the military barracks. This has become the most violent electoral season in Mexico's history. We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this video from our multimedia team. Welcome back. A mission from the International Monetary Fund is in Ecuador to discuss possible loans. President Lenín Moreno and the Ecuadorian Finance Minister Richard Martinez have been holding a series of meetings this week with international financial institutions, including the IMF and the World Bank, as they seek to cut public spending. Ecuador's previous president, Rafael Correa, expelled the IMF in 2007, accusing it of financial blackmail. Argentina's President Mauricio Macri sworn in Javier Iguacel as the new energy minister and Dante Sica as the new production minister. The move comes just after the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, approved the country's $50 billion aid package. The Buenos Aires Stock Exchange soared more than 8.6% at the opening on Thursday on news of the formal approval. Nonetheless, vocal street protests and threats of labor strikes have greeted President Macri's decision to seek financing from the IMF.
Amidst ongoing protests against the deal with the IMF, the government of Mauricio Macri has moved forward with their plan, which could put the country in debt, affecting those most vulnerable in society.
Now Macri has this crazy idea to put us in debt with the IMF. We have already lived through the ordeal. We have suffered, and we have the scars on our body to show it. So we fight, because us, seniors, will never stop taking to the streets.
The executive board of the IMF approved the 3-year loan with the government of Argentina, receiving an immediate disbursement of $15 billion.
We are now going to be ruled by the IMF. This is history repeating itself. We have been robbed before by the same white-collar criminals who steal all the money and flee, and they leave us with useless infrastructure.
Who is responsible for this? They have to return the millions stolen from us. We shouldn't pay our foreign debt. We have been robbed.
Argentinians did not wait to make their feelings known. They say that Macri's government is doing great damage to future generations.
The government is celebrating this while us workers and retirees are shouting that this is the worst thing that could happen to the country. The IMF will rule our economic and social policies. This is what happened in 2001, with a monstrous debt that took away people's retirement funds.
This indignation is based mostly on the fact that the loan was approved on the basis of a floating currency exchange, reducing state subsidies, a decrease in public works, the sale of sustainable funds to pay for people's retirement, among other neoliberal policies.
Today marks 70 years since a first group of migrants from the Caribbean arrived on the Empire Windrush ship in Britain. Ceremonies have been organized in London to thank the people who arrived in the post-war period to help rebuild Britain and provide essential services. Commonly known as the Windrush generation, many came as British citizens and were supposed to have an indefinite right to stay. But earlier this year, a scandal broke out when it emerged that the government had reclassified thousands of Caribbean-born UK residents as illegal immigrants. Many lost their jobs and access to healthcare, and some were actually deported. Joining us on the line from London is Gus Jones, an academic and equality campaigner who refused Theresa May's invitation to this celebration. Gus, hello. Why did you refuse the invitation, and how are people in the Afro-Caribbean community reacting overall to this tribute?
Well, there is a lot of anger amongst people about what the Prime Minister has done, not just in recent past, but for the last few years. The environment that she created has led to a lot of misery. In fact, some people who should be receiving treatment for very serious illnesses have had this treatment withdrawn, and therefore they're facing death. I'm talking about diseases such as cancer, leukemia, and so on. Now, all of that is very, very brutal and unnecessary and illegal. So there is a lot of anger amongst people about this. The other thing, of course, is that the government has in fact extended the border agency into functions of the border agency to landlords, schools, doctors. All these people are now required to provide evidence that those whom they are treating are legally allowed to stay in the country. Now, it's not the business of landlords or head teachers or principals of schools to be immigration officers. And so there is a hostile climate generally, and of course those who want to identify illegal immigrants don't make a differentiation between people who were born here and people who came here recently or may have been here undocumented for some time. So it's a very pernicious activity, and it is against the human rights of African and Asian people.
So you were mentioning this hostile environment. What is happening with the government of Theresa May? What are they doing to try to resolve this, to correct what's happening in this situation?
The government has now revoked the deportation orders that had been produced in relation to over 2,000 people. It has offered to compensate some of the people who have lost their jobs, some have lost their homes, because they were not able to work and so on. So it's making some amends. But having said that, they are still operating the laws illegally in respect of quite a number of people.
Thank you very much, Gus, for your time.
And that is why I thought there was nothing to celebrate with the Prime Minister.
Indeed. Thank you, Gus. We were talking to Gus Jones, an academic in London, about the Windrush scandal. To another story. As opposition groups continue to spread violence around Nicaragua, citizens reject these actions that seek to overthrow the Sandinista government.
Most streets in Managua have an air of tranquility as families try to overcome the violence spread by opposition groups. like Rosa, who just 1 week ago had her house broken into and was threatened by perpetrators. She remembers how just 3 months ago her kids would go out to play football every day after school. Today they can only leave home if they really have to.
This is truly horrible. To go back to the past like this, we hadn't seen events like this in a very long time. There are violent deaths every day. Armed gangs walk our streets from early morning, and from 4 p.m. you can hear the gunshots. Because they shoot those they can't intimidate. I'm just grateful that my 3 kids are still alive.
Marbelli is from one of the 178 families who, according to the Truth, Justice and Peace Commission, have lost someone during the recent violence. Just 1 week ago, her brother was shot dead, and then his body was burned. He was a member of the Sandinista Front, just like Marbelli herself. Despite this, she will continue to stand up for her organization.
We have lived through war, so we don't want another one. We have been persecuted since we were children. We have seen family members die. We want peace. We want our country back. So we are marching for peace all over the country.
Psychologist Maria del Socorro feels the current reality will have lasting consequences. It will deeply impact families as well as society as a whole. This violence has greatly damaged children.
All that is happening emotionally and psychologically affects everyone. Families have lost their jobs and are seeing the country as a place with no more opportunities. Families have lost hope and are becoming divided, or more like disintegrating. People are migrating or just escaping to somewhere else.
The majority of people want peace, and they feel the best way is to hold a national dialogue. This is what the Mediation and the Witness Commission wants, and has asked for talks to restart between the government and the opposition.
Let's go to our correspondent, Maria Jose Diaz, who has more details from Managua on those hopes that the dialogue for peace can resume.
The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights will present a report to the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States regarding the political crisis hitting the country since 18th of April. This crisis has left so far 178 dead and hundreds injured, according to the Truth, Justice and Peace Commission. The report will summarize their final conclusions and observations after the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights visit to Nicaragua. Meanwhile, people have high expectations for the resumption of dialogue after the government of Daniel Ortega formally invited international organizations to observe the talks with the opposition. The parts are just waiting for the Catholic Church, which is mediating the talks, to make a call for the dialogue to resume.
Maria Jose Diaz from Managua. Social organizations marched in El Salvador to demand opposition lawmakers not to privatize water and for this resource to be declared a human right. The protests were held in the capital city, San Salvador, outside the Legislative Assembly. They warned members of the opposition party, Arena and PCN, that they will continue protesting until a new decision is reached. Other groups are also protesting against lobbying by companies who want to privatize water.
They are saying this is not privatization, that it's private management. But we know that as soon as it falls on private hands, it will become that. Whether they like it or not, we won't stop. We will defend our water. This is what happened with the telephone service, banking, and with the US dollar, since we don't have our own currency. We will fight for our right to have water, since it's human right.
They are arrogant by saying they won't privatize water because they have even privatized pensions, when they always say they wouldn't do it. There are many things that the private companies should keep their hands off, like public assets. They've stolen communications, electricity, pensions, and now they also want to take away our water.
In Colombia, 14 football team jerseys were seized at Bogotá's airport as they were soaked with about 11 pounds of cocaine. The shipment was being transported to the Netherlands, with the shirts being packed alongside typical Colombian clothing. The criminals used a chemical process in which they dissolved the drug and spread it over the clothes. Later, when the jersey arrived to the destination, they would extract the drug.
There are a total of 14 jerseys plus 6 ponchos, as you can see. The approximate weight of this load is about 11 pounds.
Puerto Rican Governor Ricardo Rosselló asked U.S. President Donald Trump to name the island the 51st state of the country during a meeting in the White House on Thursday. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence was also present. Rosselló said on Twitter that he asked Trump to end with the last enclave of colonialism and to validate the democratic will of the people of Puerto Rico. He added that only throughout statehood the 3.4 million people in Puerto Rico will be equally treated as American citizens. Let's go to another story. In Peru, new high-relief murals were discovered in the pre-Hispanic citadel of Chan Chan, a 1,000-year-old palace. The corridor where the discovery was made is one of the 10 walled palaces in the city of Trujillo, 570 kilometers north of capital city Lima. Squares and waves in high relief are part of the discovered murals. Representations of the moon animal can also be seen, a mythical symbol of different pre-Hispanic cultures that lived in the coast and northern mountains of Peru. Chan Chan is the main pre-Hispanic clay citadel in the Americas. Today at the Russia World Cup, Brazil won their match against Costa Rica 2-0. Brazilian midfielder Philippe Coutinho scored the first goal of the match at minute 90, followed by Neymar in overtime. After this loss, Costa Rica has been eliminated from the tournament. Nigeria is currently playing against Iceland, and later today Serbia will face Switzerland. The party at the Buenos Aires fan zone in Argentina fell flat, as the crowd, expecting a Messi-inspired Argentina World Cup revival, could only watch in horror as their team lost 3-0 to Croatia on Thursday. Coach Jorge Sampaoli begged for forgiveness from the country's fans, as their World Cup dreams are now hanging by a thread. "I am responsible for this result, but I was as dreamy-eyed as the fans," Sampaoli said during a press conference after the match. Argentina now has to beat Nigeria and wait for other results in Group D to have any chance of avoiding elimination. We'll take one last short break, but join us again after another video from our multimedia team.
Taking care of it. Nobody's had the political courage to take care of it, but we're going to take care of it.
So we need 10 votes. We can't get them from the Democrats.
In the Senate. Now, wait, you can't do it through an executive order.
Thanks for joining us again. Women have returned to the streets in Spain to express outrage after the Wolfpack, jailed for a sexual assault, were given provisional release. Feminist movements demonstrated across the country on Thursday and are calling for more protests this Friday evening. The 5 men were sentenced to 9 years for sexually assaulting a young woman during the San Fermin bull running festival back in 2016. But the court has set bail at nearly $7,000 for them to be released.
Esta
This decision reinforces our anger and our rejection of the legal system, which, as we've been warning, is another tool that reproduces the heteropatriarchy that oppresses us. We interpret this decision as a mockery of women, ignoring our strength and insulting us as a movement. This decision shows that safety of women is not a priority for the courts, which don't hesitate to put back on the street those who have repeatedly attacked women.
5 women activists in the north of India were abducted and raped at gunpoint when they were campaigning against human trafficking in one of the remotest villages in the country. The women were performing a street play when a group of armed men interrupted, took the activists away, and raped them. The rapists allegedly also filmed the act and threatened the victims to make the video public. The scared women didn't go to police to report the crime, and it was only after some local residents informed the police that the hunt for the criminals began, and 9 men were taken into custody. Earlier, we spoke with Brinda Adige, a women's rights activist in India, to talk about this latest rape case.
Absolutely shocking. I'm outraged because on a daily basis we are talking about protection, especially to women and children. And in this particular case, we are talking of NGO activists who have gone to a village just putting up a street theater against human trafficking, because this is one of the most heinous, brutal crimes that we are all trying to combat. And this is the way that they have tried to teach them a lesson, is to rape them, intimidate them, and not allow them to come back, to even create awareness.
Before we end today's show, a short reminder that you can watch our special World Cup program with Argentina football star Diego Maradona. De la mano del 10, the World Cup, according to Maradona, will air only on Telesur in Spanish and English every night during the tournament in Russia. These are the times at which you can watch it, so be sure to tune in. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But this and other stories, as you know, you can find on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.